History remembers the year 1502, not for what was built, but for what was stolen. Somewhere in the borderlands between Poland and Ukraine, a girl whose name might have been Anastasia or Alexandra watched her village burn. She was 15 years old, perhaps younger, the daughter of a Christian priest who had taught her to read scripture and embroider cloth. But on that day, when Crimean Tatar raiders descended like locusts, her childhood ended in screaming. She was torn from everything she knew, shackled alongside dozens of other girls, and marched hundreds of miles to the slave markets of Kaffa there. Beneath the shadow of stone walls older than empires, men examined her teeth, her hair, her skin. They whispered in languages she didn't understand. And then they named her price. Not for labor, not for her mind, but for what men could take from her body. She was cargo now, valuable cargo, with red hair bright as autumn leaves and eyes that held a terror she would learn to bury deep. The merchants who bought her knew exactly where she belonged. They took her to Constantinople, to the Forbidden Palace, to a place the world would come to call the Harem. By 1520, when Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent ascended to the throne at age 26, the girl from the borderlands had been given a new name, Harem, the cheerful one. It was a mockery wrapped in silk, because nothing about the harem was cheerful, no matter how the poets described it. Behind gilded doors and latticed windows, hundreds of enslaved women lived in what the empire called the abode of felicity. They slept on cushions stuffed with goose down, bathed in rosewater, learned to play instruments and recite poetry in 5 languages. To the outside world, it looked like paradise. But paradise does not lock its gates from the inside. The harem was not a sanctuary. It was a factory designed to produce heirs while ensuring that no woman ever accumulated enough power to threaten the throne. Every girl inside those walls understood the rules. You were a number until you caught the sultan's eye. You were a body until you bore a son, and even then you were expendable. The sultan's mother, Hafsa Sultan, controlled everything. She decided which girls were bathed, perfumed, stripped of every hair on their bodies with arsenic paste, and sent crawling on their knees to the sultan's bed. It was not romance. It was ritual. It was submission dressed as seduction. And when Hafsa Sultan chose Harem for her son, the girl from the burned village became something else entirely. She was no longer just a slave. She was a possibility. Suleiman called her to his chambers once, then twice, then again and again. Most concubines were used for a night and forgotten, but Harem was different. She didn't just submit. She spoke, she laughed. She recited poetry and engaged him not as a sultan but as a man, and that was her first weapon. Not her beauty, though she was beautiful. Not her body, though she gave him that too, but her mind. Her ability to make him feel less alone in the vastness of his power. Yet in a palace where every woman was watching, every success bred 100 enemies, and the most dangerous of them all was Mahidevran, the sultan's former favorite and mother of his eldest son, Mustafa. Mahidevran had held Suleiman's attention for years. She had given him his heir, and now this red-haired slave was stealing it all away. One day, jealousy boiled over into violence. Mahidevran attacked Harem, clawing her face until blood ran down her cheeks. When Suleiman summoned Harem again, she refused. She sent word that she was ruined now, soiled meat, unworthy of his presence. It was a gamble that could have ended her, but instead, it intrigued him. He came to her, demanded to know what happened, and when she told him, something shifted. He didn't just desire her anymore, he trusted her. And trust, in a palace built on betrayal, was more valuable than gold. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling the weight of what these women endured, then you understand why we do what we do. History isn't just kings and battles. It's the voices that were silenced, the women who fought with the only weapons they had. If this story matters to you, subscribe to Grim History. Help us keep telling the stories the world tried to forget. Because Harem's fight was only beginning, and what came next would test not just her survival, but her soul. By 1533, Harem had done the impossible. She had given Suleiman 6 children, 4 sons and a daughter. Shattering every rule of the harem, Ottoman law dictated 1 son per mother to prevent alliances. But Suleiman gave away every other concubine in his palace. He sent them to provincial governors like unwanted furniture. He wrote poetry to Harem calling her his moonlight, his soul, the throne of his lonely heart. And then, in an act that shocked the empire to its core, he freed her from slavery and married her. No sultan had married a concubine in over 150 years. The court erupted in whispers. Witchcraft, they said. She had poisoned the other women's wombs. She had bewitched the sultan with dark magic from her Christian homeland. But it wasn't magic. It was strategy. Harem had studied the palace like a chessboard. She knew when to retreat, when to provoke sympathy, when to speak, and when to let silence do the work. She became Haseki Sultan, given apartments forbidden to women for generations, and a daily allowance of 2,000 as. She built mosques, schools, fountains, and a women's hospital next to the slave market where she herself had once been sold. She fed thousands through soup kitchens and negotiated diplomatic letters with her native Poland. To the people, she was a saint. To the palace elite, she was a threat. Because power in the Ottoman Empire came with a price written in blood. When a sultan died, all his sons were equal claimants to the throne, and only one could live. The rest were strangled with silk bowstrings, their bodies left in unmarked graves. Harem had 4 sons still breathing, but there was another, Mustafa, Mahidevran's boy, the eldest, the beloved. He was tall, noble, adored by the Janissaries and the people. He looked like a sultan, and if he took the throne, Harem's sons would die. So she moved. First she whispered doubts about Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's closest friend and advisor, a man who had once been a slave like her but now wielded dangerous influence. She told Suleiman that Ibrahim was corrupt, disloyal, too close to Mustafa. One night in 1536 Suleiman invited Ibrahim to dinner. They talked, laughed, reminisced like brothers, and when Ibrahim fell asleep, Suleiman gave the order. He was strangled in his sleep. The next morning the palace woke to silence. Ibrahim was gone, and Harem was still standing, but Mustafa remained. And as her sons grew, so did the danger. When her eldest, Memde, died of smallpox in 1543 at just 21 years old, Harem was shattered. Now she had fewer pieces on the board. So she married her daughter to Rustam Pasha, the new Grand Vizier, a man loyal only to her. Together they planted a seed of treason. They whispered that Mustafa was plotting a coup, gathering armies, planning to overthrow his father. In 1553, Mustafa rode to his father's military camp in Persia, desperate to clear his name. He entered Suleiman's tent, knelt before him, and before he could speak, the guard seized him. His father watched in silence as the silk cord tightened around his son's neck. Mustafa died at 38 years old, murdered on his father's orders, and the empire trembled. The Janissaries wept openly, poets mourned, but Harem's line was now secure. Except it wasn't. Her youngest son Cihangir, born with a twisted spine, died soon after, many say from grief over Mustafa's death, that left Selim and Bazid 2 sons, one throne, one inevitable execution. Perhaps it was mercy that Harem never saw the end. She fell ill in 1558, her body finally surrendering to the decades of stress, schemes, and sorrow. Suleiman, the man who had defied an empire to marry her, stayed at her bedside. When she died, he wept. He stopped wearing silk. He ate from clay bowls. He mourned her for the remaining 8 years of his life. And when he died in 1566 on a battlefield in Hungary, he asked to be buried beside her. Not as sultan and concubine, but as husband and wife. Yet even in death, the game continued. Bayezid rebelled against his brother Selim, fled to Persia, and was hunted down. He and his 5 sons were strangled in 1561, leaving only Selim, the wine lover, the weakest of her boys, to inherit the empire. The woman who began as stolen cargo had rewritten the rules of power. She proved that a slave could become a queen, that a concubine could command an empire, and that survival sometimes required blood on your hands. Historians still argue whether Harem Sultan was a villain or a hero, but in truth, she was something far more complex. She was a woman who refused to disappear in a world designed to erase her. Her tomb still stands in Istanbul, beside Suleiman's, covered in poetry and tiles of blue and gold. It doesn't speak of witchcraft or manipulation. It speaks of a love so fierce it broke centuries of tradition, and an ambition so relentless it reshaped an empire. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of all, that in a palace built on silence and submission, one woman's voice still echoes 500 years later. We want to hear from you. If you could ask Harem Sultan one question,